What if the truth you've buried deep within your heart could shatter everything you thought you knew? In the bustling streets of Chicago during the 1930s, where the air was thick with the scent of ambition and desperation, Al Capone found himself torn between the man he was expected to be and the boy he had once dreamed of becoming. The echoes of gunfire and the whispers of betrayal danced in the shadows, but it was an unexpected revelation about his absent father that threatened to unravel the very fabric of his life. Al, a young man with a fierce gaze and a heart filled with unfulfilled dreams, navigated a world that was both intoxicating and suffocating. Beneath the polished veneer of power and influence lay a raw vulnerability that he rarely shared. He yearned for connection, a sense of belonging that had eluded him for years. His dreams were simple yet profound: to rise above the chaos of his upbringing, to create a legacy that would make his family proud, and to understand the man who had left a void in his life. The stories of his father's absence haunted him, casting long shadows over his aspirations. Each day, he wrestled with the ghosts of his past, desperately seeking answers that felt just out of reach. In the heart of Chicago, the world was rife with contradictions. The Great Depression loomed heavy over the city, collapsing dreams and crushing spirits. The streets were alive with the hustle of street vendors hawking their wares, but behind every corner lurked the threat of violence and betrayal. For Al, this environment was both a battleground and a breeding ground for resilience. The oppressive weight of poverty hung in the air, and the specter of crime loomed large, shaping the choices he made. It was a hostile world where trust was a rare commodity, and survival often came at the cost of one's soul. As Al grappled with his reality, a secret long buried began to surface, igniting a conflict that would challenge the very core of his identity. The revelation that his father, a man shrouded in mystery and shame, had a past intertwined with the criminal underworld, sent shockwaves through Al's life. It was a truth that not only threatened to dismantle the image he had of his father, but also exposed the fragility of his own dreams. The weight of this newfound knowledge bore down on him, creating an internal struggle that was as tumultuous as the streets he roamed. The emotional turmoil was palpable. Al felt as though he were standing at the precipice of a great abyss. Would he embrace this legacy, or would he fight against it? The dichotomy of wanting to understand his father's choices while simultaneously rejecting the life of crime created a chasm within him. This inner conflict took a toll on his relationships, driving a wedge between him and those he cared about. Friends became foes, and trust turned to treachery in a world where survival often meant making sacrifices he wasn't prepared to confront. With each passing day, Al found himself at a crossroads, torn between the undeniable pull of his family's past and the desire to carve out his own path. The pressure mounted as he faced judgment from those around him who believed he was destined to become a reflection of his father. In a society that thrived on labels and assumptions, Al struggled against the tide of expectations. The revelation of his father's identity served as both a curse and a catalyst, forcing him to question not only who he was, but also who he wanted to become. As he navigated this tumultuous journey, he encountered a series of events that would ultimately challenge his belief systems and reshape his understanding of family, loyalty, and redemption. The fear of failure weighed heavily on his shoulders, but it was the glimmer of hope, the possibility of breaking free from the chains of his lineage, that ignited a fire within him. Al realized that to truly understand his father's legacy, he first had to confront his own demons and redefine what it meant to be a Capone. In the midst of this chaos, moments of kindness from unexpected sources began to emerge. A chance encounter with a young woman named Clara, whose fierce spirit and unwavering determination mirrored his own struggles, offered Al a glimpse of what was possible beyond the darkness that surrounded him. Their unlikely friendship blossomed, reminding him that even in a world filled with betrayal and despair, solidarity could spark a change. As Al's journey unfolded, the question remained: could he rewrite his family's narrative and forge a new path, or would he succumb to the shadows of his past? It was a battle not just for his future, but for the very essence of who he would become, a fight for redemption in a city that demanded sacrifice. The stakes had never been higher, and the truth was waiting to be discovered. As the sun set on the gritty streets of Chicago, casting long shadows over the cobblestones, Al Capone found himself at a crossroads that felt more daunting than any gunfight he had ever faced. The revelation of his father's dark ties to the criminal underworld weighed heavily on him, stirring feelings of shame and confusion that he had never anticipated. He had always imagined that his father's absence stemmed from mundane circumstances, a job lost, a family torn apart. But now the truth threatened to shatter his carefully constructed world. The bustling city around him felt like a cacophony of conflicting emotions. Al walked the streets, his heart racing as he replayed the moment of discovery. His father's name whispered in hushed tones, linked with notorious figures in the crime scene. It was a truth that felt like a betrayal, not just of his ideals, but of the very image he had clung to of the man whose absence had shaped his life. This internal conflict ignited a fire of doubt within him, igniting a fear that he might be doomed to repeat the mistakes of a father he had never known. As he grappled with this new reality, Al found an unexpected ally in Clara. She was a spirited young woman who worked at a local diner, her laughter cutting through the tension that had begun to suffocate him. Their friendship blossomed quickly, fueled by shared dreams of a better life, yet was laced with differences that often led to heated debates. Clara was fiercely independent, her aspirations unyielding despite the societal norms that sought to bind her. She challenged Al's views on loyalty and ambition, pushing him to question whether the path he was on was truly his own or merely a reflection of his lineage. However, the burgeoning friendship was not without its challenges. Clara's fierce determination to rise above the limitations imposed on women in their society often clashed with Al's ingrained beliefs about masculinity and power. He found himself both captivated and intimidated by her courage, sometimes retreating into his own insecurities when she pushed him to confront the darkness of his past. The moments of connection were often overshadowed by the nagging fear that he would drag her down into the chaos he was desperately trying to escape. In the midst of this emotional turmoil, Al faced external pressures that tested his resolve. The city was rife with tension as rival gangs vied for control, and Al's long-standing friendships began to fray at the edges. Old allies turned into potential enemies, each move scrutinized under the lens of loyalty and trust. His closest confidant, Frankie, had begun to question Al's commitment to their criminal dealings, sensing his internal struggle. Frankie's sudden betrayal hit hard, leaving Al reeling from the emotional pain and practical repercussions. He had never anticipated that the very people he trusted most would question his loyalty in light of his father's legacy. As Al navigated these treacherous waters, he found himself spiraling further into doubt. The pressure to conform to the expectations of those around him clashed violently with his desire to carve out a different identity, one that was not marred by the shadows of his family's past. The whispers in the streets grew louder, and the fear of becoming a reflection of his father loomed large in his mind. Each day felt like a battle, with Al grappling not only with external enemies, but with his own insecurities. The emotional strain reached a boiling point when Al was confronted by a group of men who had once looked up to him. They demanded answers about his wavering commitment to the gang, their faces twisted with a mix of anger and disappointment. In that moment, Al felt raw and exposed, stripped of the bravado he had so carefully maintained. He realized that the weight of expectations was suffocating, and the fear of failing to live up to his father's legacy threatened to consume him. In the quiet moments that followed, Al found himself reflecting on the lessons emerging from this turmoil. The kindness of Clara, the harsh truths revealed by betrayal, and the constant pressure to conform began to weave together into a narrative he hadn't anticipated. Each encounter forced him to confront his fears and limitations, revealing the fragility of his dreams. The path ahead was fraught with obstacles, but in the face of adversity, Al discovered a flicker of resilience within himself. As he stood on the precipice of his future, the question that loomed over him became clearer. Would he succumb to the shadows of his past, or would he rise above them, rewriting his family's narrative and forging a new legacy? The streets of Chicago were alive with chaos and opportunity, but it was within himself that Al would have to confront the most significant battle of all, one for his identity, his dreams, and ultimately his redemption. As the evening air grew heavy with uncertainty, new challenges began to emerge for Al Capone. intensifying the struggle for his identity. Just when he thought he had grasped the complexities of his father's legacy and the strain it placed on his friendships, the world around him shifted dramatically. News spread quickly through the streets of Chicago that rival gangs were plotting to extend their influence, and Al found himself caught in the crosshairs. A skirmish erupted near the diner where Clara worked, throwing their already fragile friendship into chaos. Clara had always been a beacon of hope, her laughter a striking contrast to the darkness that loomed over Al's life. Yet her fierce independence now felt like a double-edged sword. She had taken a stand against the violence that plagued their community, advocating for peace and unity instead of the chaos that Al seemed unwillingly drawn to. This did not sit well with Al's associates, who viewed her activism as a direct threat to their livelihood. As tensions rose and the streets became more dangerous, Clara's passion for social justice only deepened the rift between them. One fateful evening, Clara confronted Al after witnessing him engage in a scuffle with some of his gang members. Her disappointment cut deeper than any physical blow. "You're better than this, Al," she exclaimed, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. "You don't have to follow in your father's footsteps. You can choose a different path." Her words echoed in his mind, igniting a fierce internal battle. He felt the weight of her expectations pressing down on him, yet the loyalty he owed to his friends and the fear of betraying his own identity held him captive. As the conflict between rival gangs escalated, Al's closest ally, Frankie, turned against him more openly. Suspicions had been brewing, but now Frankie's accusations of Al's wavering commitment became a public discussion among their crew. "You're losing your edge, Al," Frankie sneered one night at a meeting. "You're letting a girl dictate your choices. We need someone who's all in, not someone who's got his head in the clouds." The betrayal felt like a knife in Al's back, deepening his emotional turmoil. The very notion that his friendship with Clara could be interpreted as weakness haunted him. Physically, Al began to show signs of wear as the days turned into weeks. The late nights filled with discussions of loyalty, street corners buzzing with rumors, and the constant threat of violence took their toll. Dark circles formed under his eyes, and the once steady rhythm of his heart now raced with anxiety. Every encounter with Clara felt charged with unspoken words, and the affection he felt for her was overshadowed by the fear that she would leave him behind if he didn't conform to her ideals. In the midst of this chaos, Clara's resolve only strengthened. She organized community meetings, seeking to empower the local residents to stand against the violence that threatened their lives. But this dedication came with its own set of challenges. Her activism drew the ire of gang members who viewed her as an obstruction to their plans, leading to threats that put her safety in jeopardy. Al's protective instincts flared, torn between his desire to shield Clara from harm and the pull of his gang's expectations. One night, as he lay awake in his dimly lit apartment, Al wrestled with the weight of his decisions. He recalled Clara's laughter, the way it made him feel alive amidst the chaos. But then the images of violence and betrayal flooded his thoughts, reminding him of the world he inhabited. Could he truly step away from it all? Could he face the wrath of his friends and the streets he had fought so hard to dominate? The thought of losing Clara, of disappointing her, filled him with a profound sense of dread. As he grappled with these questions, the external pressures mounted. A violent confrontation was brewing between the rival gangs, and Al was expected to take a leading role. The streets buzzed with anticipation, and the stakes had never been higher. He felt trapped, as if every choice he made would lead him further into a destiny he was desperate to escape. But the fear of failure loomed larger than the threat of violence, pushing him to the brink of a decision that could redefine not only his life, but Clara's as well. In the days that followed, Al found himself at a crossroads more stark than before. The whispers of his father's legacy grew louder, and the options before him dwindled. He could either embrace the darkness that seemed to beckon him, or rise above it, carving a new path alongside Clara. The tension between ambition and morality escalated, forcing Al to confront his deepest fears and the very essence of who he wanted to become. Would he find the strength to break free from the chains of his past, or would he succumb to the weight of expectation and legacy? As the city braced itself for the inevitable storm, Al stood on the precipice of change, teetering between the shadows and the light. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the alleyways of Chicago, the tension in the air became palpable. It was a night unlike any other, one that would irreversibly alter the course of Al Capone's life. The gang war that had been brewing for weeks erupted into chaos, violence spilling onto the streets like blood from a fresh wound. Al stood at the center of it all, a witness to the brutality that had become commonplace in his life. Yet tonight felt different. He had just received a frantic call from Clara, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Al, you need to come to the diner. There's been an incident." The urgency in her tone ignited a fire within him, a rush of adrenaline that drowned out the cacophony of sirens and shouting outside. He rushed through the streets, dodging the chaos, the weight of his past pressing heavily on his shoulders. When Al arrived, the scene was grim. The diner, a place once filled with laughter and light, was now a battleground. Rival gang members clashed just steps away from where Clara had fought to create a safe space for their community. His heart sank as he saw her standing there, amidst the chaos, trying to protect the innocent bystanders who had become caught up in the violence. In that moment, everything crystallized for Al. He watched as Clara took a stand against a group of armed men, her voice rising above the chaos. "This isn't the way you're hurting your own people." The courage she displayed struck a chord deep within him. Here was Clara, a woman who had refused to back down, fighting not just for herself, but for everyone around her. Her strength made Al reflect on his own choices, and the stark reality of his life began to weigh heavily on his conscience. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, piercing the air like a bolt of lightning. Time slowed as Al's instincts kicked in. He leapt forward, body instinctively shielding Clara from the impending danger. The bullet whizzed past, but the shock of the moment sent ripples through him. As he stood between Clara and the chaos, he felt the gravity of his actions and the choices that had led him to this point. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He had been living in the shadows of his father's legacy, perpetuating a cycle of violence that threatened to consume everything he cared about. Emotion surged through Al, fear, anger, but most of all clarity. He had a choice to make. In that electrifying moment, he could either continue down the path of destruction or finally take a stand against the very thing that had defined him for so long. He felt his heart race not out of fear, but out of an awakening resolve. The battle for his identity was no longer just internal, it was external, and it was happening right here, right now. "Get back," he shouted to the crowd, rallying his voice against the chaos. He turned to Clara, their eyes locking in a moment of understanding. "We need to get everyone out of here," he urged, his voice steady despite the turmoil surrounding them. Together, they began to usher people away from the danger, Al's protective instincts sharpening into something more purposeful. The gang members, initially taken aback by Al's sudden shift, began to close in, but he felt a new strength coursing through him. He wasn't just a pawn in their game anymore. He was a player ready to redefine the rules. The confrontation that followed was fierce, but Al was driven by something deeper than loyalty to a gang. He was fighting for his own soul and for Clara's vision of a better future. As the dust settled and the last of the bystanders fled, Al stood amidst the remnants of chaos, breathing heavily, the adrenaline still coursing through him. The echoes of gunfire faded, replaced by the sounds of sirens approaching. He felt different, transformed. The weight of expectation began to lift, replaced by a newfound purpose. Clara's eyes held his, a mix of gratitude and pride shining through the fear. In that pivotal moment, Al Capone realized he had the power to forge a new path. The darkness that had loomed over him for so long began to recede, revealing a glimmer of light. The fight ahead would be tough, but he was ready to face it, not just as a man shaped by his father's legacy, but as Al, a man willing to choose his own destiny. The stakes had never been higher, but the possibility of change glimmered brightly, igniting a fire within him to not only protect Clara, but to also ignite hope within his community. This was just the beginning. As the dust settled around Al and Clara, the air thick with smoke and tension, the quiet that followed the gunfire felt almost surreal. But it was short-lived. The raucous shouts of the rival gang echoed through the alley, signaling that the fight was far from over. Al's heart raced as he felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He could not retreat, not now when he had finally begun to comprehend the gravity of his choices. and the responsibility he had to his community and to Clara. The greatest challenge lay ahead. The leader of the rival gang, a man known as Big Joe, stepped forward, flanked by his men who were itching for a fight. Big Joe was notorious for his ruthlessness, a figure that represented everything Al had come to despise: greed, violence, and a complete disregard for the lives of others. The stakes had never been higher. If Al didn't stand his ground, the fight for his identity and the future he envisioned for Clara and their community could end in bloodshed. "Capone!" Big Joe bellowed, his voice dripping with derision. "You think you can just walk in here, play the hero, and take a stand? This is our turf and you're just a small fish in a big pond." Al felt Clara's hand squeeze his, a silent reminder of why he was here. He had fought for so long, trapped in a cycle of violence, but in this moment he realized that true strength lay in defiance against that very cycle. The lessons he had learned from Clara's bravery and his own internal struggles surged through him. He wasn't just protecting himself or Clara, he was standing up for everyone who had been victimized by this endless war. "Enough!" Al shouted, his voice cutting through the tension. He stepped forward, fueled by both fear and determination. "This isn't the way. You're tearing our community apart for what? A few dollars, a reputation? Look around you." He gestured towards the diner, where the remnants of a once vibrant gathering place now lay in shambles. "We're better than this. We can build something together instead of destroying each other." The gang members hesitated, glancing at one another, but Big Joe's sneer only deepened. "You think you can change us, Capone? You're just a scared little boy playing at being a man." In that moment, Al felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, but also the strength that had been building within him. Clara's unwavering gaze inspired him to dig deeper, to confront the fear that had held him back for so long. This was not just about survival, it was about breaking the chains of his past. He had been defined by his father's shadow for too long, and he refused to let that legacy dictate his future. "Maybe I'm scared, Joe," Al admitted, his voice steady. "But I'm not backing down. I'm done being afraid of men like you. You think power is about fear. True power is about the courage to stand up for what's right." Big Joe's eyes narrowed, and in the charged silence that followed, Al prepared for the worst. He felt Clara beside him, her presence a calm amidst the storm. As he braced for an attack, he remembered the moments they had shared, the laughter, the dreams of a better life that they had whispered to one another when the world felt heavy. It was time to put those dreams into action. Suddenly, Al charged forward, not with violence but with purpose. He tackled Big Joe, sending him sprawling to the ground. The gang members erupted into chaos, drawn into the fray, but Al, fueled by an unshakable resolve, fought not just for himself, but for the community that deserved better. Clara joined him, her own fierce spirit igniting alongside his. They became a force, a united front against the tide of violence that had threatened to consume them. As the scuffle unfolded, Al felt an overwhelming surge of clarity. The moment crystallized. He was no longer just a player in someone else's game. He was a man fighting for change, and with Clara at his side, he felt unstoppable. In the end, the conflict subsided as quickly as it had erupted. The rival gang, overwhelmed by the unexpected resistance and Al's fierce resolve, began to retreat. Al stood panting, heart racing, but with a sense of triumph blossoming within him. He had faced his greatest challenge, not only standing against Big Joe, but also against the man he had been. The immediate result of the climax was more than just a victory. It was the establishment of a new path. Al's transformation sparked a flicker of hope in the battered community around him. Clara, her eyes shining with pride, stepped closer, and in that moment they both understood the significance of their stand. They had begun to carve a new narrative, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had been silenced by fear. As the sirens grew louder in the distance, Al knew this was just the beginning. He had chosen to fight for a better future, and with Clara by his side, they would rebuild what had been lost, forging a community united in strength and resilience. As the dust settled and the chaos of the confrontation faded, Al stood amidst the remnants of the alley, his chest heaving with exertion. The sirens wailed in the distance, a reminder that the peace he had fought for was still a fragile thing. The adrenaline coursing through his veins began to ebb, leaving behind a mix of triumph and exhaustion. He had faced down Big Joe and his gang, not just in a physical battle, but in a deeper struggle against the fears and limitations that had once defined him. The immediate consequences of that climactic moment were palpable. The rival gang, witnessing Al's unexpected courage, had retreated, but their defeat was only one battle in a larger war. Al's heart swelled with the realization that something had shifted in the community. People were peering out from broken windows, expressions of disbelief and hope mingling on their faces. He had taken a stand, and it seemed to resonate beyond the immediate violence. In that moment, Al understood that his actions had the power to inspire change, to cultivate a spirit of unity rather than division. Clara remained at his side, her eyes reflecting a mix of pride and admiration. They exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. They had been through the fire together and emerged stronger. Clara had not only fought alongside him, but had also been the catalyst for his transformation. Her unwavering belief in a better future had rekindled the spark within Al, igniting a determination that had been dormant for far too long. Now, as he stood beside her, he realized the strength that came from their partnership, an essential bond that would guide them through the challenges ahead. As the sirens grew closer, Al felt the weight of his past lifting. He thought of the cycle of violence he had been trapped in, the expectations that had shadowed him since childhood. No longer would he allow his father's legacy of fear and aggression to dictate his path. Al's heart swelled with resolve. He would work tirelessly to forge a new narrative, not just for himself, but for everyone in his community who had suffered under the weight of oppression and despair. Yet as he looked around the alley, he knew the journey would not be easy. The scars of violence ran deep and healing would take time. He recalled the faces of those he had grown up with, many of whom had succumbed to the very cycle he had fought against. Their stories weighed heavily on him, and he vowed to honor them by advocating for change, by being a voice for the voiceless. In the days that followed, the community began to rebuild. Al and Clara organized meetings, inviting residents to share their experiences and dreams. They opened dialogues with local leaders and sought to bridge the gaps that had long divided their neighborhood. Gradually, the fractures began to heal as people united in a shared vision for a brighter future. Al's presence became a beacon of hope, a reminder that they could rise above the violence that had plagued them for so long. But amidst the advancements, Al felt a familiar pull, a need to step back and reflect on his journey. He often found himself wandering the streets alone, contemplating the path that had brought him to this point. Each step felt heavy with the weight of his decisions, but also lightened by the knowledge that he was no longer bound by his past. The lessons learned through struggle and sacrifice had forged a new purpose within him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood, Al found himself standing at the edge of the park where he had played as a child. It was here, amidst the laughter of children and the chatter of families, that he felt the full impact of his transformation. He had emerged from a life of fear and violence, ready to embrace a future ripe with possibility. Yet, he knew he had to continue this journey alone, to forge his own path while carrying the memories and lessons of those he loved. With a final glance back at Clara, who was leading a group of residents in a community meeting, Al set off down the familiar streets, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The road was uncertain, and though he was stepping into the unknown, he felt an unshakable strength within him. He was not just Al Capone, the son of a notorious figure. He was Al, a man committed to change, to solidarity, to a better world. And as he walked away, he understood that while the journey was solitary, it was also filled with hope, a hope that would guide him forward, one step at a time.